Okay, if I absolutely had to declutter one palette from each brand in my collection, which one would it be? That is what today's video is about. I went through my huge makeup collection and I went through all of my eyeshadow palettes and all of the brands that I own at least 2 palettes from. I chose the one that if I had to part with it, okay, if a gun was put to my head, if I had absolutely no choice, I'm not going to declutter these palettes, okay? But if I had to, these are the ones I would declutter. Listen, this is not an easy video for me to film. I will say some of the brands, it was an easy choice, but some of the brands, it was very difficult. And it was just a matter of, I have a few palettes from the brand that I really like, which is the one I like more than the other, even in the slightest. I did just do an eyeshadow palette declutter at the end of 2023. So I decluttered all the palettes that I wasn't getting use out of, I wasn't vibing with. So I really like all of these palettes, but you know, that's the way the cookie crumbles when we do these hypothetical videos. And by the way, if you're new here, my name is Rachel, welcome. And if you're not new here, thank you so much for coming back. I love eyeshadow palettes, okay? I love eyeshadow, it's my favorite part of makeup. If you also enjoy eyeshadow, please give this a thumbs up and consider subscribing. By the way, everything that is on my face will be in the description box below. I used the Nomad New Zealand palette, and I love how this came out. I think it came out really pretty, if I do say so myself. Okay, we're gonna go in alphabetical order. I just dropped a whole bunch of palettes, so I hope they didn't break. Adept Cosmetics is the first brand I wanna talk about. So I only have 2 palettes from the brand, the Heather Austin palette and the Amunet New palette. And I chose, if I had to declutter it, I would choose to declutter the Amunet New palette, only because I love Heather's palette so much. She is one of my friends as well, so I definitely wanna keep her collaboration palettes as a memory. And this one just doesn't hold as much of an emotional connection to me, if that makes sense. And besides that, I really like this palette. I think the color story is beautiful. I think the mattes are pretty good. I don't think they're like amazing. They're not my favorite mattes I've ever used, but they're good. And the shimmers in this are really pretty. I feel like Adept shimmers are just some of the sparkliest, most impactful shimmers in my collection. And I really like the shimmers in here. I just prefer Heather's palette overall. That's the only reason. I do like this palette. I'm not getting rid of it. I haven't used it in a while. But I would choose to declutter the Amunet New. This is the light version, by the way. The next brand is Anastasia Beverly Hills. And I have done this video in the past, by the way. I can link my previous version below. I believe it was last year or the year before. And this is a brand where the palette I choose is different this year than it was in the past. And I chose the Fall Romance palette. This just came out last year. I was pretty disappointed in the formula of this, if I'm gonna be honest with you. I guess this is one of the only ones in this video where I'm like, I don't really love this palette. I don't. I think the color story is really pretty. I felt like both the mattes and the shimmers were very underwhelming compared to their past palettes. This is just my opinion. I've mentioned this before on my channel and I've gotten mixed feedback. Some people agreeing with me, some people disagreeing with me. And that's totally fine. I think color story is really pretty. I would definitely prefer like 1 or 2 lighter mattes in here because it runs pretty deep for my skin tone, for my preference. Nothing wrong with that, it's just a preference thing. But quality-wise, I felt like this was a little bit lacking. The shimmers are quite dry, the mattes are quite thin and hard to work with. So yeah, always in the past, maybe I've done this video twice before. I've picked the Alyssa Edwards palette. I keep it around because I love Alyssa Edwards. I don't really enjoy the palette, but I actually would declutter this one over the Alyssa Edwards palette. Another thing I wanted to mention is I'm not including palettes that I'm currently testing. These are palettes that I know how I feel about them. Like there are some brands where I'm still, like they came out with newer palettes that I'm still in the testing phase with. I'm not including those. I hope that makes sense. So Bella Beauté Bar is the next brand. They are a brand that I discovered last year, and I've bought quite a few of their palettes, many of which I'm still testing. But the one that I would declutter is the Star-Crossed Lovers palette. Again, I don't think this is a bad palette. I think it's nice. It was their Valentine's Day release for last year, and it is a really pretty Valentine's Day color story. Pinks, purples, softer colors, some bolder colors. I just think their palettes that they've come out with in the past 6 months, 8 months, the quality, especially of the mattes, has stepped up 100,000 levels, in my opinion. Like their newer palettes, Their mattes are some of my favorite mattes in my collection. And these mattes are okay. Like, they're not bad, they're just okay. But of all the palettes that I own from this brand, this is the one I think quality-wise I vibe with the least. Color story-wise, I love, but I definitely think they've improved their quality. The next brand I want to talk about is BH Cosmetics. I own quite a few BH Cosmetics palettes. I think they have a phenomenal formula, especially for the price point, but not even just for the price point, just in general. So I have, if I had to declutter one, I would declutter the Party in Puerto Rico palette. This is one of their, what are they called? Travel series palettes. And I like the color story of this one because I really love warm tones. But I feel like with BH Cosmetics, they have an amazing formula and then they have a good formula. That's still good, but it's not as good as their amazing formula. That's what good and versus amazing means, right? You get it. I think this is just good in terms of formula and especially in the shimmers. I don't feel like these shimmers are that extra wet looking shimmer that you can get from the brand. They're just good standard shimmers. Not a bad palette. I still enjoy the palette. I'm not getting rid of it. But I feel like, again, they have other palettes that have a better quality than this. And I could part with this if I had to. Next brand I want to talk about is Blend Bunny, one of my favorite brands ever. I own every single eyeshadow palette that they've come out with, apart from their like quad of multi-chromes. But all their full-size palettes I own. And by the way, another disclaimer. I'm going to just throw disclaimers as I go because I keep remembering them. Sorry. This is just how I feel right now, right? Like a week from now, I could change my mind. And with Blend Bunny, there were two palettes I was going back and forth with. Either one of them could be in this position, but we're not actually decluttering, remember? So it doesn't really matter. Anyway, I would choose the Forget Me Not palette. This palette I like. It is a face and eye palette, and it's supposed to be used on the face and eyes. Duh. Where you can use these tones for contour, for bronzer, for highlighting, for a shimmer highlight. I love the formula of these highlights, both for highlight on the face and for like on the lid as a metallic shadow. They're stunningly beautiful. I like neutrals like a lot. Neutrals are some of my favorite tones to wear. I find many of these tones to run very cool toned on me and kind of like almost grayish, almost muddyish, at least on my skin tone. And I definitely did not ever find a combination of these powders to work for me for bronzer or contour. Now, with that being said, I don't actually contour my face ever. I usually just use bronzer. So just none of these really worked for my face and for my eyes. I am glad to have them in my collection where I can dip in to a neutral color from Blend Bunny and their amazing formula. But just of all the palettes I have, I definitely could part with this one if I had to. It's not one that's like one of my favorites. Next up, we have ColourPop, and I have a lot of ColourPop palettes. I did recently do a ColourPop ranking video, which I can link down below. And spoiler alert, this is the palette that came in at the bottom. This is the Alice in Wonderland, Lost in Wonderland palette. I love the theming. I love the packaging of everything in this collection. I think it was so well done with the keyhole and then her falling down the rabbit hole. It opens like a book. Really, really cute packaging, very well executed. But I will say in terms of a color story, this isn't my favorite. It's very, very light in terms of the mattes. I prefer a light to deep gradient in my mattes. Now, of course, I can reach into other palettes, absolutely. But one thing I do want to say that I haven't really said before is because I have a YouTube channel, I really try to, when I'm testing a palette, I don't really mix palettes very often because I want to rank and judge them as standalone palettes. Because I don't feel like if you can only buy one palette every year, I want to be able to give you an idea of what you can create with that one palette. If you don't have a bunch of other matte shadows to dip into, that you'll still get use out of this palette and create cohesive looks with it. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, all that to say, I don't really feel I can create a ton of cohesive looks that I personally like because I do like that gradient. The shimmers in this are really pretty. I think they're nice. I just prefer all the other ColourPop palettes I have over this one. Okay, next up I have Cosmic brushes, and here's a little story time for you. Technically speaking, the palette that I would declutter is the Delicious Delights palette, which I actually ended up decluttering like a month and a half ago, right after I did my palette declutter, because if you remember, if you've been here, the dark purple shadow in that palette broke. Like 2 days after I received it, it shattered, and I tried to like press it back into the pan. It really wasn't very successful. It started falling out in pieces. My entire apartment is covered in purple eyeshadow. It's in places that I never realized that the shadow even had contact, like little makeup bags that I never packed that palette in, just like clothes. I mean, the purple shadow is everywhere. And for me, that was the only deep shadow in the palette. And I was getting so annoyed with how much that purple shadow was getting everywhere. I really was never going to reach for the palette again. So I ended up decluttering it. So technically speaking, as of my declutter series at the end of the year, that is the one I would pick. But I'm going to be true to the moment right now. Of the 2 palettes that I have from the brand left, the one that I would declutter is the Serenity palette. I love this palette and I would never want to declutter it, but I just prefer the Muse palette, which is the other palette I have, over this one in terms of color story. I think both have a great formula. The mattes are just uber pigmented, uber buttery, just stunning. And the shimmers I also really love from the brand. I don't think people talk about their shimmer formula as much as their matte formula, and I love the shimmer formula from this brand. Ultra smooth and sparkly, not chunky, not textured. And this is a really pretty like green, blue color story if that's something you like. If you've been here before, say it with me. Blues are my least favorite color to wear. Do I wear them? Yes. Do I wear them? Yes. I wear them a lot because a lot of palettes have blues in them, especially the ones that are coming out now. But if I were to choose my own makeup, not for camera, I wouldn't reach for blues. That's just not what I would reach for. But anyway, all that to say, I prefer the Muse palette. That's the only reason. This is a beautiful palette, both quality-wise and the color story is pretty objectively to look at, but I just prefer the color story of the Muse. All right, next up we have DD Signature. They are a brand that I just tried for the first time at the end of last year, and I own 3 palettes from the brand, one of which I have not used at all yet, which is the Blooming Basket. So between the 2 that I have used, the one that I would choose to declutter is the Taste of Guava Quad. I do like this little quad. I think it's really cute. It's just a color story thing. Like I prefer the color story of the Jingle Bell Ruby palette that came out for holiday. I like the more like reddish brown tones that it offers. I do like this. The shimmers from DD Signature are very beautiful, like shifty duochrome multichromes, super wet looking on the eye. But just as a color story, I prefer the other one. I don't think it's bad or anything, but this is the one I would choose. All right, next up we have Dominique Cosmetics. I only have 2 palettes from the brand, and I have to use these palettes again because I haven't used them in such a long time, and I did mention this not too long ago, but I guess between the 2, I would declutter the Berries and Cream. The other one I have is the Latte palette, the original Latte palette, which I think is really, really nice. I think this one is really nice too. I love this color story a lot. I think it's a beautiful berry color story. I do love how matte heavy her palettes are. They're all mattes except for these 3 shimmers. And there is a sequin shade up here, but I still use it primarily as a matte. It goes light to deep. I love the different tones. Honestly, like both of the palettes I own from this brand, I pretty much like equally, but in the moment, I was just going by the vibes. Like I was touching the palettes, deciding which one brought me joy, like Marie Kondo, you know? So this is the one I chose. Not really any big decision behind it. I do have to use this one again though. I haven't used it in a very long time. I'm definitely curious if you have this palette and you've used it lately. Does it still hold up? I would love to know. The next brand I want to talk about is e.l.f. And I used to own a lot of the bite-size minis from e.l.f. I'll be honest with you. I don't own them anymore, so that should tell you something. I'm not a big fan of those palettes. I think they're fine, like they're okay, but I think that if you spend a little more money, you can get much better quality shadows, like ColourPop. I only now have 2 palettes left from e.l.f., both of which are collaboration palettes, and I think they do their collaboration palettes incredibly well. So between the 2 that I have, I think I would declutter the Denim Days. This was in collaboration with American Eagle. Like I just said, I think this is so well done in terms of the packaging. It hit the nail on the head. The actual slipcover is literally the texture of the tags from American Eagle. It's like a perforated cardboard. Then you slip it off and you have this like denim textured cover. You have the tag from the inside of the jeans here. And then I know I just said I don't love blues, but I actually really liked the looks that I got out of this. I really loved creating a neutral look with the top row. Are these the best shadows that exist? No. But I think for e.l.f., they're very good. I think that the mattes are good, blendable, user-friendly, not overly pigmented, but good. And the shimmers are that, honestly, most of them are more that soft, more basic metallic, which I don't mind. Like, a lot of the time, I'm cool with that. This shade 90s vibe, this silver, is very, very impactful, very chromy. I just prefer the other palette I have over this one, but I still really like this one a lot. All right, the next brand is Fantasy Cosmetica, one of my favorite brands. I think they do an incredible job with their collections, their packaging, their theming, their eyeshadows. The quality is top-notch. I'm still testing their current palette that they came out with recently, which is called the Wizard palette. I presume if I had my final thoughts on it, I probably would be decluttering that one because it is a blue monochromatic palette. But I'm trying to be true to what I said. And I think the one of the ones that I've got my full thoughts on that I would declutter would be the Rogue palette. I don't want to declutter this one though because it's so beautiful. But again, it is pretty blue, like the center, and this shade over here pulls a little bluish gray, but I love the purples. I love that there is a matte black. These shimmers, some of my favorite shimmers in my collection from Fantasy Cosmetica. They're just wet, shifty, shiny without being chunky, without being like unflattering on the lid. But I think color story wise, of all the palettes that I have from them that I've really fully tested, this is my least favorite color story. That's kind of the only reason, honestly. So yeah. I mean, it's a beautiful palette. I'm not gonna get rid of it, but even though this is hypothetical, it was still hard for me to choose. We're getting towards the middle here. Leave me a comment down below letting me know, like, would you like me to do the inverse of this? Where I tell you what palette I would keep. Like if I had to only keep one palette from each brand, which would it be? Obviously, a lot of these, like I said, I have 2 palettes from the brand, so you can kind of guess what the other one would be. But a lot of these brands I have multiple palettes from. Yeah, I'm thinking about doing the inverse. Let me know if you'd be interested in seeing that. All right, next up we have Game Beauty. I have 3 palettes from the brand, and they are a brand that I discovered at the kind of tail end of last year. And the palette that I would declutter, this one was easy for me, is the Metaverse palette. I like this palette in terms of color story, although there are 4 blues in here. But all the rest of the shades in here are warm tone neutrals, which, listen, I love. I love, love, love. I think, though, of the 3 that I have, this quality-wise doesn't hold up as well as the other ones. I own 2 of the palettes from their Elemental Blast collection, and I feel like the quality of those I just prefer, both mattes and metallics. One of the metallics here is pretty dry. The mattes are good, fine. I just prefer the quality of the Elemental Blast palettes. All right, next up we have Glam Light, and this was a hard one. Honestly, this was a hard one. And I just went with my gut. And it was kind of like as I was trying to pull these palettes out of my drawer, this is one that frustrated me the most. The one that I wanted to throw across the room. And so I thought that's probably the one you should choose. And that is the Scooby-Doo palette. This palette is massive. Like, it is as big as my head, bigger than my head. And it has very sharp corners. I've always said I can use this as a weapon if someone breaks into my apartment. I know that I can grab for this. I think color story-wise, it's really pretty. It's a lot of jewel tones, but I don't also love how much space there is between the shadows. I get that they're trying to have the characters peek through. Scooby-Doo isn't super nostalgic to me. Like, I like Scooby-Doo, but it wasn't something I grew up really watching a whole lot. But color story-wise, it's really pretty. Quality-wise, it's really pretty. It's just the packaging I'm not in love with. Next up, we have Gourmand Girls. I have quite a few of their palettes. And so I picked the Silent Night palette in collaboration with Doodles by the Bunny. I mean, honestly, it's just because there's 5 blues in here. That's the only reason. And all the other ones, I just love all of the other palettes I have from the brand so much. I think quality-wise, it's very, very good. I also think it's still a good palette. I can still create other looks. It's not all blue. It's not monochromatic blue. But of the ones I have, this one is the color story I like the least. All right, next up we have Hip Dot. I only own 2 palettes from the brand. And of the 2 that I own, the one that I would declutter is the Evanescence palette. You get why, okay? Do I really have to say it? No. I prefer the color story of the other palette that I have over this, although again, I really liked the looks I got out of this a lot. I think the quality of shadows is pretty darn good. There is a pressed glitter, which I don't love, and this duochrome I don't really love. It's a little bit kind of lackluster, and if I have a duochrome, I want it to be good. The shimmers, like the standard shimmers and the mattes in this, I thought were really good. And I kind of wish that Hip Dot would just make regular palettes without being super gimmicky, without having pressed glitters that came in like kind of regular packaging. I think that they would attract a lot of customers because I think the quality is there. I mean, at least of the 2 palettes that I've tried from the brand. Technically, I own the My Chemical Romance palette. Like, I bought the whole PR box when it came out, but I was a huge My Chemical Romance fan growing up that I'm not touching. Like, I haven't touched, actually, that's a lie. I did swatch the palette, but I've never used it on my eyes. I never used the eyeliner. I never used the brush. And I'm not going to, because that's how nostalgic it is to me, and that's how weird I am. All right, next up we have Juvia's Place, and the palette that I would declutter would be the Saharan 2. Fun fact, I did declutter this from my collection 2-3 years ago, and then I pulled it from the declutter pile and brought it back to my collection because I took a closer look at it and I was like, wow, actually that is stunning. These shimmers, I remember when Juvia's Place was first getting big, like when I was first getting into makeup, 2016, 2017, and I remember using these palettes and being like, how are they selling this at this price? Like this incredibly affordable price. How are the quality of these shadows so good? Because at the time I didn't really understand that price doesn't always equate to quality of shadows, if that makes sense. So I just remember falling in love with the formula of Juvia's Place. The shimmers here are very beautiful, a more standard metallic, but very wet looking on the lid, very smooth. And I really like warm tones, which we've got down here. But I just prefer the other palettes I have from the brand. Next up, we have Lunar Beauty, and I do own a handful of palettes from the brand, and the one that I would declutter would be the Strawberry Dream palette, just because the other 2 that I own, I just prefer the color story. There's nothing wrong with this. The other 2 palettes I have are more neutral leaning, and I just see myself reaching for them more, if that makes sense. Like quality-wise, nothing wrong with this at all. The mattes are beautiful. The shimmers are beautiful. I do like this color story. These 2 blues, am I gonna use them? Probably not. But I do like the rosy tones, the red. But I like the other 2 palettes that have more, they're more, like I just said, more neutral leaning. Still a good palette. Next brand we're gonna talk about is Natasha Denona. Again, this one was not a hard choose for me. And listen, it's my video, so I make the rules. And let me tell you why I chose this palette. This is the Mini Metropolis. For my personal collection, I would declutter this because I'm missing a shade. I'm missing a shade. It's broken. If I hold this up too long, it's probably gonna start raining down on me and pull a Cosmic Brushes, and I'll have gold shimmer everywhere. So that's kind of a shame to me that like I really can't even use, I mean, I can stick my finger in there and use it, but usually when I have a palette with a broken shadow, I'm really not gonna reach for it. And I bought this when it came out in 2021, I wanna say, 2021 holiday. And I used it to review and then I never used it again. I do like these 3 matte shadows. They're just neutrals, they're nice. This shimmer, I will never really choose to use. I don't really like greenish blues. It's just not something I'll reach for over all the other Natasha Denona palettes I have in my collection. This is the one I really won't reach for. And I probably will end up decluttering this in my next declutter round. One of my absolute favorite brands, Nomad Cosmetics. I will probably never declutter anything from Nomad, from Odin's Eye, or from Unearthly. Those are my favorite brands. And I want to be like 80 years old and own every single palette that the brand has released. Wouldn't that be cool to like just have as a museum? Maybe it wouldn't be that cool, but it would be cool to me. So anyway, my point is I'm not decluttering this, but this definitely was an easy choice for me. And this is the Santa's Village palette. It is my least favorite palette from Nomad. I didn't hate this as much as many people did, but I definitely don't think it's their best quality palette in terms of the shimmers. They're definitely hard pressed. They're definitely more just a topper type of situation. Not super creamy, not super easy to just like put all over the lid and have an opaque shimmer. And the other thing I don't love about this palette, even more than the shimmers, is the mattes. I don't feel like they really go together very well. I found myself using this palette with like a one matte, one shimmer look and calling it a day, or pulling in other things. This is one of the few palettes that like, I really feel like I had to pull in other matte shadows especially to create a cohesive look, just because they just don't go together well, at least for my experience, preference, creativity level. Next up we have Odin's Eye, and for Odin's Eye I chose the Verdandi palette. I got this in a mystery box that I bought from them a couple of years ago, and I just think like quality wise, does not compare to their newer palettes. This came out quite a while ago. And then also color story wise, it's not a color story that I really tend to want to reach for. It doesn't really inspire me necessarily. You can, or at least I can, see myself creating cohesive looks, but of all the Odin's Eye palettes I have, this one definitely doesn't stand out. All right, Pat McGrath, which is a brand I don't really talk about on my channel because I don't purchase from Pat McGrath very often. And I only own 2 palettes from Pat McGrath. And the one that I would choose to declutter would be this one from Holiday a couple of years ago, the Mothership Mega Celestial Odyssey. It's huge. It's huge is the first reason. I think it's nice. Like, I like the color story. We basically have a ton of shimmers in all different tones. Any kind of tone you may want, you probably get it in here. And all of the shimmers in here are not her special formula. They're not like the Blitz Astral formula that she has that's extra sparkly. They're just good standard metallics. They're fine. And there's only 4 mattes in here. So, you know, again, I like more mattes in a palette, or at least a 50-50 split. And I think these metallics are pretty, but I don't think they're anything outrageously special. And I don't regret purchasing it, but I think if it came around again, I think I actually bought it on sale, as a matter of fact. But I think if this came out this year, I would not purchase it. I wouldn't even bat an eye. I think this was my first purchase from the brand because I was curious. I actually like her cheek products. Like, I own one of her palettes that has like 2 blushes and a highlight. I like that a lot. Her eyeshadows, I think, listen, don't cancel me. But I've not tried one of her like regular Mothership palettes, but I do have one of her quads with the Blitz Astral formula in it. Those I think are really pretty and unique. But her regular metallics are nice. You know, they're nice, but like, is this worth $80, $90? I don't know. For me, no. All right, next up we have Patrick Ta. I do own 2 palettes from Patrick Ta. The one I would choose to declutter is his very first eyeshadow palette, which is the Major Dimension palette, which was his neutral palette. Now, again, I don't want to declutter this because I actually really like this palette. I use the crap out of this. I don't know if you can tell. It's very messy. Every year for the summertime, I go back up north. I live in Florida, but I'm from Massachusetts. So I go up to New England for like at least a week or 2, and I brought only this palette for the 2 weeks that I was gone, and I used it to death. I loved it. I got so much use out of it, creating so many different looks, day looks that are lighter, night looks that can be deepened up. I really like the cream shadows from Patrick Ta. I know some people don't. I got use out of those. I like the gradient of light to dark in the mattes. I like the different shimmers, but I will say I feel like his quality improved with his second palette so much more, particularly in the shimmers. These are definitely drier, toppery type of shimmers that are very crumbly. So I would suggest using a glitter primer or wetting your brush if you're using them, but I just prefer the quality of the rose palette that he came out with. Next up, we have Shroud Cosmetics. I did purchase the Dark Academia palette from them, which, as we all or some of us have talked about or know, I don't know what's going on with Shroud. They're not responding to anybody's messages. I hope that the owner is okay. So I don't have that palette even though I bought it. So the only other 2 palettes from Shroud that I bought are the collaborations with Betty Jean. So I'm so sad that I have to hypothetically declutter one of her palettes because, once again, like I said, I consider her one of my friends, and I don't ever want to declutter my friends' collaborations. I just don't. Even if I'm not using them, I'm not going to declutter them. But if I had to, okay, if I had to, of the 2 palettes that I have from Batty Bean and Shroud, I would declutter the It's Freakin' Bats. I don't want to because I think it's beautiful. The looks I got out of this are beautiful. The quality is beautiful. I just prefer the color story of her Halloween palette. It's a little more warm leaning. There's some oranges in there, which I love. This color story is just a little more cool leaning, and I prefer the other color story. But otherwise, I'm not getting rid of this. You can pry it from my cold dead hands, but if I had to, I would declutter this one. Sigma is the next brand, and this is another brand that like I don't want to declutter anything I have from the brand because I like everything I've tried from the brand in terms of eyeshadows. But if I had to declutter one, I would declutter the Beauty and the Beast palette. But if you saw my palette ranking for last year, you should know that this came up very high in my countdown. Very high. So I still love this palette. I think it's so beautiful. Like, look at this. I think it's so beautiful. It's a neutral palette with a couple of pops. And I can create a colorful look over here. Like I created a pinky purple look when I did my 2 looks video with this palette, but you've got a whole mess of neutrals. I think quality-wise, Sigma is phenomenal. Like they're just a good staple classic formula, if that makes sense. Like the mattes are good, they're pigmented, but they're not so over the top pigmented that they're hard to work with. The shimmers are just good standard metallics. There are some that have like a duochrome flip to them, but they're not like ultra like wet, creamy. They're just really pretty, really shiny on the lid. I love this palette, but of the ones that I have, if I had to declutter one, I guess I would choose this one. Next brand is Simply Posh, and again, of all the palettes that I own from the brand, I love their formula. I love their color stories. I love how they lay out their palettes, but I guess I would choose Berry Icy, which pains me because I love this palette. This was my first palette I ever tried from the brand. But I will say, like I said about one of the other brands, Fantasy Cosmetica, I am currently testing their Aurora Lights palette, and I think I would put that one below this one. I still like that palette a lot, but just color story-wise, I think that is the one that I like the least personally. The other palettes that I have more mixes of like neutrals, more mixes of warm tones in there. And just color story wise, I guess if I had to choose one, I would choose this one, although I love it. I think quality, like I said, is phenomenal. I love Simply Posh's shimmer formula. It's very smooth and very dimensional and sparkly. By the way, if I have any codes with these brands, I'm sure I'm popping them up. If I got these palettes that I'm talking about in PR, I'm popping them up on the screen at some point. I didn't really say for any of these, but I'll always pop it up on the screen if I don't say it. But this one I bought myself, actually. All right, we're down to the last 3 brands. Unearthly Cosmetics. Probably my favorite brand of all time is Unearthly Cosmetics. And if I had to, I have a lot of palettes from Unearthly. I'm gonna at some point do an Unearthly Cosmetics palette ranking. It might be a little while before I can do that, but that's in the cards for me. But anyway, of all the palettes that I have, this actually was not a hard choice for me. And I chose the Thirst Quad. This was from their Halloween mystery box of 2022. Yeah, 2022. I'm like, what year is it? I don't even know. I love her. This vampire girl on the front. Love her. I had kind of a hard time working with these red mattes. This is one of the few times that when I create a look with this that I actually had to wipe my makeup off and start again. I don't do that very often, especially if I'm filming. I had a really hard time working with these 2 red mattes. That's kind of the only reason. I like the color story. I like the shimmer. I like that there's a matte black. I like that it's a little quad. I hope she'll do quads in the future because I think they're fun. But just these red shadows were a little hard to work with, at least for me. Next up, we have What's Up Beauty. And of the 3 palettes that I own, all 3 are so beautiful. I don't want to declutter any of them. I love them a lot. And this was literally me just kind of closing my eyes and pointing to one because I kind of feel very similar about all 3 of the palettes because I do feel like What's Up Beauty has a pretty cookie cutter way that they lay out their palettes where they're mostly neutral mattes and pops of color with the metallics. So take this with a grain of salt is what I'm trying to say. But I chose the Geodes palette. I don't really have a big explanation for this. Like I just said, I like this palette a lot. I think it's really, really pretty. We have all these neutral mattes. We have one of this like yellowy mustard matte, which is really pretty. And all of these shimmers are really shiny, really sparkly, really pretty, more light colored metallics, which I like. But I do like to have a couple of darker metallics thrown in the mix, which with their other palettes, they do have that. This was the very first palette I ever got in PR. I was so excited when they contacted me. So I'm so thankful to have this, and I'm not going to declutter it probably for that very reason. Like, it's a memory for me, and it is a good palette, and I do recommend it. But if I had to, I guess I would choose this one. And then last but not least, we have Wicked Widow Beauty. Again, I really, really enjoy all the palettes I have from the brand, honestly. Quality-wise, I think they're so good. And I think quality-wise, the palette that I chose is my favorite, quality-wise. And that is the Scissorhands 2 palette. I did get this in PR from the brand, and I do have a code with the brand. But I'm gonna open it and you're already gonna know what I have to say about it. It's a lot of blues. I will say the shimmers in this are just breathtaking. Wet, shiny, shimmery, one swipe, full opacity. There is also a like iridescent duochrome up here, which is so beautiful. The mattes in here are good. I don't know, it's a lot of blue. That's the only reason. All right, and that is it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. This was hard, okay? This was hard. It was a little heartbreaking to hypothetically think about decluttering more palettes from my collection. But yeah, I hope this was just more fun than anything else for you, not taking it too seriously. The palettes that I chose, I like them really. But you know, that's how it is. I would love to know your thoughts on any of the palettes I talked about, or if you want to see me do the inverse, like I just said in that halfway through the video, if you want me to see the ones I would keep if I had to only keep one from each brand, that might actually be harder. So let me know if you'd like to see that. Yeah, I hope you're having a good week. And if you did enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up. That helps me out a lot when you do that. And if you're not already subscribed to my channel, I would love it if you would consider subscribing before you leave. I do upload videos weekly, and I'd love to see you back on my channel again. I want to thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye. What? Oh my God.